Hello and welcome to another edition of Middleware Friday for September 15th, 2017. This is episode 31, and today we're going to be talking about subscribing to Blob storage events using Azure Event Grid and Microsoft Flow. So no community content today. Well, I'll try to pick that up in the next episode that I publish. But today I just wanted to focus on the core content, which is, once again, subscribing to Blob storage events using Azure Event Grid and Microsoft Flow. Before we get started, I do have an announcement to make. If you tuned into last week's session, you would have noticed that Steph Jan was the presenter, and Steph Jan has agreed to take on a more frequent role as part of Middleware Friday. So he's going to be publishing content every second week, and I'll be publishing content on alternate every second week. And really what's driving this is a couple things. One, I've decided to take on a new role, and in that new role I need to ensure that I'm dedicating the correct amount of time to make sure I'm successful in that role. And also I would say the variety of technology that I'll be talking about will be, I would say, reduced and be more focused. So I do want to ensure that the audience has the right mix of content, and I thought by bringing on Steph Jan, he will be able to ensure that our content is remaining fresh, and it does cover a variety of topics, which I think is pretty important in this world of middleware. So thanks again to Steph Jan for joining the show. He's been a guest presenter a couple times, obviously international speaker, very well known. He's recently started, or is about to start, a new role with Codit in the Netherlands, so congratulations to him on that. And looking forward to working with him in this capacity. We've been good friends for quite a few years now, run a few marathons and whatnot, so it is a pleasure to work with Steph Jan in this capacity again. As for more details to where I'm headed, you'll find out in early October when I share those details publicly. So before we dive into this week's content, I feel it's worthwhile explaining what Event Grid is. Now, Microsoft has a very short video where they do explain this, so I figured, what the heck, why not just play this video, as it provides a good description of the actual service.
Let's face it, continuously polling events gets a lot harder the more complicated your system gets. Or does it? Introducing Azure Event Grid from Microsoft, the first fully managed event routing service that lets you easily subscribe and react to any events you're interested in. Whether you subscribe to a wide range of preset system events or route your own events with custom topics. Because it's native to Azure, Event Grid connects with virtually all Azure services, which lets it automatically route events at any scale with high reliability and low latency, giving you richer coverage and much more uniform event tracking. Now you can push publisher-defined event notifications to virtually any endpoint, including webhooks, functions, and event hubs, while using intelligent filtering. And if you're running serverless solutions, get ready for this. Event Grid works seamlessly with any other service you're currently using. It's a no-brainer. It's fully managed pay-per-execution meets uniform event consumption, all wrapped up in one neat little URL, azure.com/eventgrid. Try it today, free. An event like this is, well, really worth paying attention to.
So that was obviously a video clip from Microsoft. You can see the clip in its original location at this YouTube URL. So another resource that is worth watching is last week's Middleware Friday episode. So in this episode, Steph Jan goes through a lot more details than what I'm about to go through as it pertains to Event Grid, so it's not worth it for me to go through a lot of those details. So if you're not familiar with Azure Event Grid, I encourage you to check out that session, and then come back where we will talk about a flow use case where we're going to consume events off of Azure Event Grid. In order to subscribe to Blob storage events using Event Grid, you do need to join a preview. And you can go ahead and join the preview from this link below. And what you do is you actually go into using the Azure CLI, you can go ahead and execute these two commands at the top here. And once you've done that, you're going to need to wait probably at least a few hours. I've done it twice on two different subscriptions, and it's taken a couple hours both times. No guarantees, but that's my experience anyways. And you will get an email that's tied to your Azure subscription indicating that you've successfully joined the preview. You can also check the status or the state of your registration by issuing this command, and you should see that it comes back as registered. Also, do note that currently this is only available in West Central US. So take note of that as you go through this on your side. Now, once you have access, you can go ahead and create a storage account. Now, it is important that you do specify Blob storage as your account kind, and otherwise you can go ahead and use the default settings, but as I mentioned before, please ensure you're using West Central US. Now, what happens is once that storage account gets provisioned, you will now see an event grid label underneath settings. You can go ahead and click on that, and then you'll be presented with a no event subscriptions message, but you can then go ahead and start to create your subscriptions. Now, what I've done here is just to show you how you would manually create an event subscription. So as Steph Jan talks about, there's different Azure services where events can be published from natively to EventGrid. Blob Storage happens to be one of those, but there also is, say, a .NET client where you can create custom publishers as well. So in this case, obviously, we're using the Blob Storage, but I can then go ahead and register my own event subscription. And really, the only option right now when you want to create your own event subscription is to use a webhook. And this I'm talking manually, not automatically. So in this case, I can provision a webhook. I need to provide a subscriber endpoint. In this case, I'm just using request bin. And I can also provide some optional filters for prefix and suffix and indicate whether or not I want case sensitivity or not. When I go ahead and create it, now we'll have it registered, and then this is an important parameter or property that we're going to use inside of Microsoft Flow, and you would also use it inside of Azure Logic Apps if you're going to use that as a subscriber. What it really is just the ARM ID path for your Blob storage. Now, on top of that, there are different event types that you can subscribe to. So in the case of Blob storage, I can select all whenever Blob is created or whenever a Blob is deleted. You have those options that you can choose. Now, part of the reason I wanted to show you this is, number one, to get this ARM ID, but also to show like this distinction that happens when you go ahead and use the event grid connector in either Logic Apps or Microsoft Flow. So in this case, I'm in Microsoft Flow. I'm in a blank canvas. I can go ahead and type in event grid. Will then see this event grid connector. I can go ahead and click on it, and then I can go ahead and configure it. Now, when I configure it, I need to log into my Azure account. Now, there are a few people that have experienced some issues when dealing with MSDN accounts. So I guess beware of that there are some challenges related to MSDN accounts. In this case, I am using a corporate Azure account, so I didn't run into those challenges. Also, I did see a few anomalies when I went to use a service principal. So you can use a service principal to log in as opposed to using your own credentials. But once again, in this example, I've used a corporate subscription and I've used my corporate account that's tied into ADFS. But, so when I go to configure this, I need to select my subscription. Then I need to select a resource type. So Microsoft Storage is a resource type that has come out after this original connector was provided. And so what you can do is you can just simply type over top or custom attribute. And in this case, you want to provide Microsoft storage. You then need to provide that resource name that I just showed you on the previous screen. So in some cases, you might want to create your own event just so that you can get this ARM ID and then go ahead and delete that event. And then you can go ahead and paste it as the resource name inside of your actual connector. When you go ahead and enable your flow or enable your logic app, what you will see is an endpoint registration or a subscription being created inside of your Blob storage. Now I have two here, and the reason why I have two is I was messing around with logic apps and flow. I wanted to see if there was a different experience. Largely they are the same, but even if you are using flow, you will still see the name being registered as starting with logic apps. And I think that's largely related to the fact that flow sits on top of logic apps itself. Now, once these subscriptions have been provisioned, you can then go ahead and edit them if you wish, just by clicking on them and then clicking edit. Now, here's the use case that I want to go through with you today. As you know from previous editions of Middleware Friday, I always try to have some sort of a use case. And it's usually related to something that I'm either currently working on or have previously worked on. Now in this case, this is a scenario that goes back a few years, but it is a real world example. And in this case, I was working for a power distribution company, and we were moving from your traditional meters that exist on your house to automated meters where you can actually get reads remotely. So sort of the before IoT was cool, I would say this is one of the earlier applications of IoT. And in this case, you would have the data heading over the power lines over something called PLC, power line carrier, where it would hit a substation, and then you could go ahead and broadcast those events up to some sort of provider where you're doing some sort of data collection related to all of your meter reads. Now, in this particular scenario, when we were swapping out the meters, you needed to take a photograph of the meter read for the old meter and the new meter. And you would be surprised the precision required around meters and people's consumption of power and how it relates to paying for that power. So that was something that we had to do. It was more than 400,000 customers. We had to have this before and after photos of the actual meter itself. And this was a few years ago, before a lot of this cloud technology existed. So we were using BizTalk to do some of this work where we would, capture or move these meter images from like an FTP location. And then what we'd want to do is attach some metadata based upon the file name of the image itself, and we would populate it into SharePoint. And the whole idea is that in the event someone called to complain about their bill, they would be able to go into a customer or contact center agent would able to go into SharePoint, type in their site ID, and get the exact meter reads of before and after their meter was exchanged. Now, moving ahead to today, I think the use case is still relevant. I think maybe the technology set is very different though. So in this case, we were storing these images inside of SharePoint itself, which is fairly expensive when you think about the storage in an on-premise SharePoint environment, and also when you have over 400,000 of these images. Nowadays, you'd want to put something like that into cloud, and Blob storage makes sense as a location for it. Now in this case, what we're able to do is we want to keep the images in Blob storage. We can use local redundant storage or even geo-replicated storage to get multiple copies. We don't really have to worry about that data disappearing. However, instead of moving the data like we did in the previous example, we can just attach or subscribe to the event of the fact that the image was written to Blob storage. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to use Microsoft Flow and the Azure Event Grid connector to subscribe to these events whenever there is a new artifact, in this case an image, created inside of Blob storage. We can then get the metadata from that event itself, and we'll need to do some level of parsing in order for it to be able to get stuffed into SharePoint eventually. But we also can run these images through computer vision. Now, certainly you don't want to get in a situation where someone has, taken a bad picture. Maybe it's a picture of their shoe, or maybe their thumb's in the way. And now all of a sudden you can't actually use that image, but you don't know until someone calls, and then you could have a compliance issue. So why don't you actually run that through computer vision and ensure that it's a picture of a meter? And once you confirm it's a picture of a meter, go ahead and upload the metadata to the SharePoint site, SharePoint Online. And I don't have it shown here, but if it's not an actual meter, then why don't you go ahead and send an email to someone at the contact center, or even the team that's replacing the meters, to say you need to go back and take pictures of this meter because you took a picture of a dog or you took a picture of a foot. So let's go ahead and we will, let's run this demo. Okay, I'm in the Azure portal and I'm at the container within my Blob storage account. And I'm going to go ahead and upload an image. So we'll just use this GUI in order to do so. I'm going to select this image 11345678, and we will go ahead and upload that image. And what we will find is pretty much instantly that as soon as that event occurs, that SharePoint Online is going to have a new record added to it. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hit refresh. And now we have the 6th record. And what we've been able to do is take that file name and parse it using Microsoft Flow and separate the site ID. You can think of site ID much like a customer ID, and the date that the image was taken. We can also capture the URL for the image itself inside of Blob storage. So I can go ahead and click on this, and we will see sure enough, there is a picture of the meter itself. Now, how did I build this solution? Well, let's head over to Microsoft Flow, and here's my event grid connector, which I've showed before. And what will actually happen is when this event is published, we're going to get a JSON representation of that event. Now, so what I've gone ahead, and it's a fairly complex structure, it's not, I guess, simple, but you've got attributes like event type, event time, and ID, some data, API, client request ID, e-tag, content type, and URL, which is pretty important. So what I did initially is I would have created this event, I would have published to request bin, I would have seen the native event data constructed, and then I can just go ahead and use this data and the useSample payload to generate the schema feature, which is I love. And now I've got a typed message that's arrived. Okay, so just heading into my run details just to show you that message. Here's an example itself, right? So we have the body and the topic, the URL, the subject, the event time, the ID, the API, etc. So it is a fairly, a complex message body. Now, what I want to do is I need to get some details about the image itself. I need to actually parse the file name out of this URI. So that's really what I'm going to do in these next steps. So I've got the JSON message, and then I'm going to just use some compose actions in order to determine what the start position is of my file name and to get the URL length, so that when I go ahead to get parse the actual file name itself, I can have a cleaner function in order to do that, as opposed to trying to do all this other string manipulation in this small window. So I'm just really breaking that up into parts. Next, I just create a Boolean value, and the idea behind this is I want to determine whether or not a meter is detected as a result of the output from the computer vision call. So here I'm going to provide the URL from Blob storage, and I'm going to pass that over to the computer vision API, and then it's going to come back with a bunch of metadata, and then I can go ahead and check to see if the tag names attribute contains the word meter. So heading back over to the flow execution, we can see the outputs from the describe image call. And so it's detected that it's a thing, a meter, parking, or a sign. Now, in this case, for this use case, saying it's a meter is good enough. If it would have been a dog, well, that's a totally different situation. Now, in the event that it is actually a meter, like that is true, I'm going to then go ahead and connect to SharePoint, and I'm going to populate a meters list. And here's just a title called meter added, and I can provide these other details like the site ID, the image date, and then certainly the image URL. Now, in the event that a meter is not detected, I can then just go ahead and send an email for further exploration. So I hope you enjoyed the demo of Event Grid and Microsoft Flow. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, why would I want to use Flow in this particular case? And if we come back to some of the core principles around Microsoft Flow, it really is around that citizen integrator, that citizen developer. And you could argue maybe this is a little bit too advanced of a solution for them. But I think the bottom line is events come in many different shapes and sizes, right? You have technical events, you would have business events. And I think attaching or subscribing to some of these events as a citizen integrator is absolutely a valid use case. Like, consider a situation when you have, a new contact created inside of CRM or a new opportunity logged inside of CRM. Those would be cases where you would be able to subscribe to different events and then attach your own workflows, because those are things that are important to you. Maybe you have, specific customers, and there's business events that you as an individual, maybe as a salesperson, you want to know when those things occur. And these are situations where, if someone goes ahead and creates that Event Grid subscription, then it's easy for you to be able to subscribe to these different events and then react to them using the actual Flow tools. Now, in other situations, using Logic Apps makes perfect sense, where you have more of that pro integrator involved that is building out perhaps even more complex scenarios than this. But I think there's definitely a space for it. This was just one of the use cases that I was familiar with or that resonated with me from my past that I thought made good sense to use with Microsoft Flow. So that concludes the episode for today. Thank you, BizTalk360, for continuing to be a great partner of the show. If you haven't signed up yet, there is Integrate occurring at the end of October in Redmond. I will be there. So will Steph Jan and a lot of other MVPs and Microsoft employees as well. So thanks again for watching. Steph Jan has the next episode. I will see you in 2 weeks.
Saw the way she looked me in my eyes. She said, baby, I am not afraid to die. Push me to the edge. All my friends are dead. Push me to the edge.